Mr. Weeb, is everyone here and are we ready to go?
Yes, we are.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Okay, good morning and welcome. My name is Sandy Roberts, and I'll be chairing this panel of the Natural Resources Conservation Board to hear a review of decision LA 21011 for the Hutterian Brethren Church of Little Bow.
Thank you to Madam Chair.
Sorry, are we okay? Thank you to all parties for accommodating the board's request to hold this hearing today. I will now briefly introduce the panel. For your reference, complete board member biographies are on our NRCB website. Panel members, if you'll please wave your hand when I introduce you. We'll start with Paige Stewart. Ms. Stewart was the general manager of a large beef feedlot in central Alberta, chaired the Alberta Cattle Feeders Association, and has championed multiple environmental sustainability initiatives in agriculture. Next, Earl Graham. Mr. Graham has extensive experience in municipal politics, including serving as the Deputy Reeve of Clearwater County. For 3 years, he was Central Zone Director for AAMD&C, now RMA, and he was a member of the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board. And myself, Sandy Roberts, I'm an agricultural engineer. I was an approval officer with the NRCB until 2010, have been a municipal councillor for the town of Carstairs, and was an instructor at Olds College. And to help you identify the panel in this Zoom virtual hearing, the panel members all have a Zoom background with a mountain scene. Assisting the panel today are Bill Kennedy, the board's general counsel, and Laura Friend, manager of board reviews. If you have technical difficulties during the hearing, please phone or text Ms. Friend. And if you don't have her number, I'll say it slowly and I'll repeat it again so that you can get it down. Her number is 403-620-8294. So again, that's 403-620-8294. And you can phone or text her and she'll help you out. And depending on the issue, it's possible that we may have to pause the hearing until everyone is again fully connected. We have a number of NRCB staff here today, including field services staff, Fiona Vance, the Chief Legal Officer for Operations is here, as is Andy Cumming. Andy is Director of Field Services Applications. We have staff members who will be doing the virtual on-screen document management. Sylvia Kaminsky, okay, Sylvia is our primary document manager, and Carolyn Taylor. Carolyn is also here and she's backing up Ms. Kaminsky. When you want a document shared on the screen, please clearly say the exhibit number and the PDF page number, and then give the document manager a few moments to get the document loaded. I would like to introduce our Zoom host, Justin Weeb.
I don't have video. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Justin is with MNP, and he will be overseeing all of the technical matters related to this virtual hearing. Also present is a court reporter from Amicus Reporting, who will provide a transcript of today's hearing that will be posted on the NRCB's website. Welcome, Ms. Gerbrandt. During the hearing, we ask that you identify yourself and speak slowly and clearly so that the court reporter can ensure that we get the transcript right. The NRCB has also provided a YouTube link on its website for members of the public to observe the proceedings. The link is on the NRCB's main website page. If there are members of the media on our YouTube feed and you have a question regarding today's process, please contact Janet Harvey, NRCB Communications. She can be reached at the email address janet.harvey, HARVEY, @nrcb.ca, or by telephone at 780-720-2317. Your participation in this hearing is very important to the panel. We look forward to the information that you will be providing and recognize that our decision will have a significant impact on your community. The process that we follow is inherently formal. This is a quasi-judicial proceeding, and so a certain level of formality is necessary. However, we do try to minimize formality to the extent possible so that participants are comfortable presenting their information to the panel. The board encourages you to ask questions if you are unsure about the process or if you're unsure whether you are allowed to interject. And please do this at any point. I'll do my best to answer your question or will direct Mr. Kennedy to help out. If we need to take a short break so that Mr. Kennedy can spend a few minutes to help you understand, that's fine as well. The purpose of this hearing is to review decision LA 21011 dated May 4th, 2021, issued by Approval Officer Joe Sonnenberg. The Confined Feeding Operation, or CFO, is located at the east half of 32-14-25 west of the 4th Meridian in Vulcan County. The municipal district of Willow Creek and the McDougals were granted directly affected party status but chose to not participate in the hearing today. Field Services email dated June 10th advised that the approval officer is not available to attend the hearing. However, both Ms. Vance and Mr. Cumming, who we already have introduced, are here and are available to answer process questions. The approval officer denied the Hutterian Brethren Church of Little Bow's application to expand an existing multi-species CFO. The application was to construct a chicken layer barn with attached manure storage and to increase chicken layer numbers from 25,000 to 10,000. A request for review, or RFR, from the operator, Little Bow Colony, was received by the filing deadline of May 26, 2021. No rebuttals were received by the deadline of June 2nd, 2021. The panel met on June 3rd, 2021, and in its RFR decision number 2021-04, advised that it had made a decision to grant the RFR and hold an oral hearing. That decision report provided the reasons for granting the appeal and 4 questions that the panel will have regard for at this hearing. The panel advised that a virtual hearing using the Zoom platform would commence at 9 a.m. on June 29, 2021. The panel directed that written submissions by directly affected parties should be filed with the board no later than June 18, 2021. A submission was received from Vulcan County on June 18th, and a rebuttal was received from Little Bow Colony on June 24th, 2021. NRCB's Field Services advised parties on June 10th that it would not be filing a submission. All panel members have and are familiar with the complete set of documents that parties have submitted as evidentiary materials for this hearing. Given this, there is no need for you to reread the entire record materials already submitted. In order to make the best use of time, we request that each party use their presentation time to highlight or clarify the important points that are relative to your written submissions. I'd now like to provide a brief overview of the process for the hearing. First, all parties will be registered. Then each participant will have an opportunity to address any preliminary matters they may have. We'll then begin with the evidentiary or direct evidence portion of this hearing. In this hearing, the board believes it is beneficial for Little Bow Colony to present their direct evidence first, followed by Vulcan County. When it is your turn to provide evidence, you will be sworn in or affirmed by the court reporter. Once sworn in or affirmed, any new written evidence that you want us to consider may be entered into the record on request. We'll then give you a chance to highlight or expand upon any points in your submission that you feel are particularly significant. After each party has presented their evidence, they will then be open to questions by the other party, NRCB Field Services, and NRCB Board, Council, and panel members. Once questioning is complete, the party that presented evidence will have an opportunity to introduce redirect evidence. Essentially, we give you a chance to submit any further evidence or comments to address areas raised in the questions posed to you where you believe there is some additional information that the panel should have. Once we've completed direct evidence and questioning of both Little Bow Colony and Vulcan County, Little Bow Colony may provide rebuttal evidence. If rebuttal evidence is provided, Vulcan County, NRCB Field Services, and NRCB Board, Council, and panel members will be given the opportunity to ask questions. Last, each party will have an opportunity to provide a final oral argument. Little Bow Colony will present first, followed by Vulcan County. Little Bow Colony will have the final word with a reply argument. This is your opportunity to address any issue raised in Vulcan County's final argument. I know that was a lot, but are there any questions with regard to the process we intend to follow today? We will be taking breaks during the day, including a lunch break. I'll try to pause in a natural spot in the proceedings, so we won't set a specific time for breaks. We hope to be done by 4 o'clock today. If we need to go later than that, a question that I have is, are all parties available? Vulcan County? Vulcan County, would you be available if we need to go beyond 4 o'clock today?
Oh, sorry about that. Just a technical issue unmuting there. Yeah, I guess if necessary, yeah, we will have someone available.
Okay, thank you. Little Bow Colony?
Yeah, we would be available. I'll just note, and it's Richard Harrison, there's a lot of lag on our end. And so I just query whether it would be possible for those not speaking to perhaps cut their camera feed, just so we can see if that improves the bandwidth on our end.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Harrison. So if you're not on camera, if you would please stop video, it may help that lag. Thank you. Ms. Gerbrand, if we need to go later than 4, would you be available?
Yes, I would be.
Thank you. Mr. Wiebe?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now proceed to register participants. And it may be helpful as well to please spell your names, your last name anyway, for the court reporter. We'll start with Little Bow Colony. Who will be representing Little Bow Colony?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, panel member Stewart and panel member Graham. My name is Richard Harrison. I'm counsel of Wilson Laycraft. I act for Little Bow Colony. We'll be presenting 3 witnesses for the panel today. Our first witness will be Mr. Sam Hofer, who is the CFO manager for Little Bow Colony. Our second witness will be Ashley Kozak, who is a partner with MMP. And our third witness will be Mr. David Cheddar, who is with Shady Lane Colony near Grand Prairie. And I'll spell those names for you. Sam, S-A-M, Hofer, H-O-F-E-R, Ashley, A-S-H-E-L-Y, Kozak, K-O-Z-A-K, and David, D-A-V-I-D, and Cheddar is spelled T-S-C-H-E-T-T-E-R.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Next on to Vulcan County. Who will be representing Vulcan County and who will be giving evidence for the county?
Jason Schneider. I will be representing Vulcan County. I'm the Reeve. That's J-A-S-O-N-S-C-H-N-E-I-D-E-R. Our manager of development services will also be providing evidence.
Thank you. My name is Ann Erickson, Manager of Development Services for Vulcan County, and it's A-N-N-E-E-R-I-C-K-S-O-N.
Okay. Mr. Schneider, will anyone else be giving evidence for Vulcan County?
No, we do have 2 members of our planning commission joining us as observers.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other parties eligible to participate in the hearing? All right, then, let's begin.
Hi, Madam Chair.
Sorry, I did neglect to mention one more on behalf of Vulcan County, Ryan Dick with the Old Man River Regional Services Commission. I'll let him introduce and spell his name for the record.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ryan Dick, acting as planning advisors for Vulcan County. Not looking to give a submission, but here, if the need arises for questions and the like, it's R-Y-A-N-D-Y-C-K.
Thank you, Mr. Dick. Okay, so are there any preliminary matters to address, procedural, legal, or others? Little Bow Colony, is there anything that you have for procedural matters?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one quick question for the panel. Two questions. First, while testimony is being given, is it okay to have the witnesses observing that testimony? And second, whether the witnesses are able to have their notes available to them while presenting.
Mr. Kennedy, would you address that, please?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and say both, yes to both. If there is a situation, Mr. Harrison, where you or another party thinks that procedurally there's a need to exclude a witness from the proceedings or a future witness from the proceedings during a particular part, then we could entertain that. It's unusual. I'm trying to think of an NRCB hearing where I've seen that happen. I don't know that I have. And as for notes, yes, if it's helpful, by all means, please do refer to notes. We do ask that council, if we take a break during a time when their witnesses are still impaneled, we do ask that council not have discussions with those witnesses during the break about the evidence and responses they're providing. And hopefully that answers your question, Mr. Harrison.
It does, thank you. And I'll just say, since the video has been turned off, the stream's been much better on our end. So thank you very much for everyone for doing it.
Great, thank you. That's great to hear. Vulcan County, do you have any preliminary matters?
Vulcan County has nothing at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
I have nothing.
Ms. Vance?
Yeah, field services, we have nothing at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. So the hearing exhibit list was prepared and posted on the NRCB website for all parties to reference. And I propose that we adopt the hearing exhibit list, which includes the relevant documents before the panel. Are there any objections to adopting the exhibit list? Okay, hearing none, we will consider them adopted. All right, we are now ready to hear direct evidence from Little Bow Colony. So I will leave it in Ms. Gerbrandt's hands to swear or affirm Little Bow's witnesses.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and panel members again. As I noted, our first witness will be Mr. Sam Hofer, who is here as the CFO on behalf of Little Bow, and he's prepared to be affirmed this morning.
Mr. Harrison, sorry, do you just have the one witness, or because I'll do them all at once?
Thought I recognized you.
Good morning.
I suppose, yeah, just the one witness for now. I think it makes more sense to do each individual.
Okay, Mr. Hofer, could you please state your name?
Sammy Hofer.
Sammy Hofer, do you solemnly affirm the evidence you're about to give in these proceedings will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Harrison, please proceed.
Morning, Mr. Hofer. What is your role at Little Bow Hutterian Colony?
I partake in the day-to-day operations, CFO operations at the colony. But in respects to the application, I was tasked with some of the technical details, such as the mapping, scaling of the project, which I then forwarded to our financial manager, Darius Hofer, and he submitted it to the NRCB.
So would it be fair to say, for example, that you prepared the application for the expanded CFO that will be here before the panel here today?
That's correct.
Now, how long have you held that position with Little Bow Colony?
I've been involved with operations ever since I was a child, but more so over the last 5 years.
And please tell the panel why Little Bow Colony wants to expand its livestock operation.
To come into compliance with some of the changing rules and regulations that are put forth by the industry, some of these being animal welfare, biosecurity, as well as food handling. That would be one. I could also say that the economic value that it adds to our operation, in that there's some incentive for producers to step up and meet some of the demand in the food supply, and also And this helps to keep cost to producers stable and keeps produce affordable. Along with that, I think I could add the added economic value it brings to our operation in its entirety, and the fact that we have 90 members within our community that we have to support. And this CFO operation is one of the ways in which we make that happen and keep our head above water.
Now, you mentioned that there are incoming rules and regulations with respect to this CFO operation. Are there costs involved with respect to coming into compliance with those rules and regulations?
Yes, there's substantial costs involved. Automated control systems are expensive. Caging requirements that are mandatory, they're not applied as in do it if you want. They are mandatory, so there are some costs involved there.
Now, would it be fair to say, for example, that the expansion will help to pay for those costs?
Absolutely, yeah.
And is that one of the drivers for that, for seeking that expansion?
Yes, I would agree.
Now, why don't you walk the board through the current poultry CFO at Little Bow Colony?
The current CFO operation consists of 2,500 units of quota that we own. In addition to that, we also have approximately 1,100 units that are over-based quota. We are currently leasing out the over-based quota due to size of our facility and not being able to facilitate that extra quota. So there are some rules in regards to over-based quota that the board allows producers to lease out that quota for 10 years maximum. And at that point, it is required for them to place the quota within their own facility. And that period of time came to fruition for us and our operation in 2019. We had other obligations at the time, so couldn't commit to placing that quota. So we approached the board and requested for a 3-year extension. They granted that extension. And as far as the facility, it's 20 years old and showing aged infrastructure. It relies heavily on manual controlling the environment within the barn that should be upgraded, needs to be upgraded to a more continuously monitored and automatic control of that environment. This would improve animal welfare indefinitely. Along with that, I would say that the facility has a on-site grading station, which allows us to market our eggs locally to restaurants, grocers on a daily basis. Is that enough to?
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, how long has Little Bow Colony had a CFO poultry operation?
We've had a CFO poultry operation since 1983, and that was at what we'll call the old place, which is beneath the Twin Valley Dam currently. But it's been there since 1983 when Little Bow was founded and established the colony there.
And why don't you tell the panel or walk the panel through how Little Bow Colony came to be in its current location?
As I just mentioned, we were founded in 1983, and we established our operations at, again, at what we'll call the old colony beneath the Twin Valley Dam. In the mid-1980s, the provincial government put a halt to our operations, and the reason to this is the proposed project, which is now the Twin Valley Dam. The colony continued at that time during those restrictions, and we basically made do with what we had at that time until the mid-1980s, when the provincial government obliged the colony to relocate to make way for that project. We did that without much without much resistance, because we understood the significance of that project and what it brought to the region, and especially the farming community, and as far as irrigation is concerned. The government and local planning and development officials selected a parcel of land to relocate the colony to, and basically grandfathered all our existing CFOs from the old colony to this new location. And we took possession of the colony in 2002.
Now, why was the current location selected for Littleville Colony?
It's under my understanding that it was selected because of its location. We're quite a ways out from many significant areas of population, towns, villages, as well as availability to water and the resource that we had at the old place, so that our water licenses could remain in place.
But prior to its current location, would it be fair to say that Littleville Colony was actually located in the municipal district of Willow Creek?
Most of our CFOs were located in Willow Creek, except for the dairy operation and our main shop.
Madam Chair, I wonder if we could now pull up Exhibit 10, if they were numbered sequentially, or the last document in the exhibit booklet. Hoping that we can go to map 12, which is about 7 pages from the last page. Nope, there we go. Yeah, scroll down. There's map 12. Oh. Nope, figured just go up a little bit more. Oh, that's good, thank you. Appreciate that. Now, Mr. Hoffer, do you see where Highway 529 is identified on this map?
Yes, I see that.
Should be in the middle, approximately proportion of this map.
Yeah.
And do you see just southeast of the number 529, there is a picture of a cow?
Yes, I see that.
Are you able to confirm that that is the location of Littleville Colony?
That is the location, yes.
And that's the location of the confined feeding operation that we're here to discuss today?
That's correct.
So fair to say that the confined feeding operation is in the CFO exclusion zone on the IDP.
That's right.
Mr. Hofer, who is Doug Bork?
Mr. Bork was the government official appointed by Alberta Infrastructure to manage the Twin Valley Dam project, and one of his roles was to facilitate the relocation of the Hutterian colony.
And did you ask Mr. Bork to provide a letter outlining his understanding and recollection of Littleville Colony's transition?
We did, on behalf of the colony, we did ask him to provide a letter.
I wonder if we could now turn to page 4 of Exhibit 9. I'll be looking specifically at the third last paragraph of page 4. When it starts with despite the colony's hardships. There you go. So Mr. Bork writes, despite the colony's hardships identified below during the relocation transition, they have fully cooperated and acted in good faith to assist in the successful completion of all phases of work so that the dam and reservoir plan is completed within the time frame allotted and functioning as designed for comprehensive water resources management for Southern Alberta. Do you see that, Mr. Hofer?
Yes, I see that.
What hardships has Little Bow faced?
I think Little Bow has faced two significant hardships. And the first being that the government curtailed our operations back in the mid-1980s, right after we established the colony, which is probably one of the most important times for colonies to establish their operations. I specifically remember we weren't allowed to develop any permanent structures. However, they did allow temporary housing to be put in place there, and we had approximately 9 to 10 mobile trailers, but essentially all other permanent construction was halted.
You mentioned 2 hardships. What was the other hardship?
Oh, sorry. The other hardship would be the uprooting of the entire colony, in that case around 100 members, and placing them into a colony that they had very little input in designing or constructing. And the adjustments, both the social adjustments required, as well as getting the operations back to full production.
Now, you mentioned that when you transitioned to the new colony, you had little input into that new colony's designs. Can you describe who did have input into that colony's designs?
I think predominantly it would have been the provincial government. They basically, from our understanding, replaced what we had existing. We did see some improvements, but essentially it was just a replacement.
Now, how about the historical value of the former location? What can you tell me about that?
The historical value, as in growing up there, our childhood, my childhood anyway, I was 14 when we moved. It's tied to that location. Childhood memories, being kids growing up there, definitely that's something that we lost in the transition.
Did you have did Little Bow Colony have a confined feeding operation, a poultry CFO at the old location?
Yes, and I think it was established also in and around 1983 when we first moved there.
Please walk the board through the reasons you feel it should approve Little Bow's application for an expanded CFO.
I'd like to start with saying that we reviewed the approval officer's decision and understand how he came to that conclusion. However, given our location and being that we're 15 kilometers from any significant populations, and in our case, it would be the village of Champion, the factors of a nuisance are minimal, and we have very few neighbors and acreages in the area. Some of the other reasons we think they should be approved is our proximity to the waterways and the fact that we meet and exceed AOPA legislation and any requirements that the NRCB regulates. As well, the improvements that we're making, the improvements that are proposed in this development or this expansion project, as far as animal welfare, biosecurity, and proximity to other CFOs on that parcel of land. as well as the economic aspect that it brings for our operation, and as well as the regional and Vulcan County and beyond.
When was the last time that your poultry or Little Bow Colony's poultry CFO expanded?
Actually, this is the first application with the NRCB since 2000, 2002.
When the operation was
Yes.
first established in
Yeah.
the new colony.
That's correct.
And how about with respect to water licensing? Does Little Bow Colony have a water license?
Yes, we fall within our licensing in the fact that we are under the Water Act.
And the expanded CFO, would that still be within the water license?
Yes.
Now, how far is Little Bow Colony from any boundaries?
We're approximately 1,600 meters from the boundary with the MD Willow Creek.
So you're over 1.5 kilometers away from the MD of Willow Creek.
That's correct.
And is that the location of where the expanded CFO would be, or is that the location where the colony is?
And that's the location of where the proposed CFO would be.
So the proposed CFO would be approximately just over 1.5 kilometers from the MD of Willow Creek.
Yeah, that's correct.
Now, how would this expanded CFO improve the environmental impacts of the current CFO operation?
It would increase the environmental or improve the environmental impact in the fact that we're actually proposing a 400-meter further separation from the nearest waterway, and being that the Little Bow River in comparison to the current CFO.
So you would actually be moving your operation further away?
Yeah, by approximately 400 meters.
Would you be developing any new land to move this the current CFO operation?
No, it would be on developed land.
And you understood I meant the new CFO?
Yes, I did.
How about animal welfare? What can you tell me about that in terms of the improvement there?
With the new caging requirements that are put forth by the Egg Farmers of Canada, they're transitioning producers out of conventional caging, which we currently have in our barn, and into a more enhanced or free range caging system. And I think we can all appreciate in the recent years, the pressure that has been put on producers to take into further consideration animal welfare. And so there's a significant improvement, along with, as I mentioned earlier, the environment that the birds are in, with updating these systems to a more automated, continuous monitoring and continuous adjustment.
Why don't you, today is obviously a good example, we're in a heat wave. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what the new system would be versus the old system would be like given today's temperatures?
Well, the new system, as I said, continuously monitors outside temperatures and adjusts the internal temperature of the barn accordingly, whereas our old barn is more manually controlled. So it's up to the discretion of the operator to make those changes. So the birds experience less extreme temperature differences, which is an added comfort level to the animals, of course.
Yeah. And how about you mentioned the environmental positives. How about, for example, greenhouse gas emissions?
Absolutely. The proposed construction or the proposed plan of the CFO would significantly improve the efficiency of the barn.
And a lot of those environmental improvements you mentioned at the outset are costly, correct?
That's correct.
And one of the factors that you noted early on in requesting the expanded CFO was to be able to afford those environmental improvements.
That's right.
And why wouldn't you move the CFO outside the CFO exclusion zone?
Any parcels of land that we own that we would consider suitable for this type of development is, for example, across the road, those 2 quarters across the road and to the north are irrigated acres, and so would either require taking that land out of production or moving the water rights to a different parcel of land. And we're very familiar with the process of transferring water rights, and that we would lose 10% of the water rights allotted in the transfer of the water rights to a different parcel of land. But also the cost to the infrastructure and the pipeline and the pumping and pumping capacities, just the revisions on that end, that the cost would be substantial. And in taking that, the second option, and taking that crop out of, or that parcel land out of production, it doesn't make much sense for us to move a CFO 200 meters across the road onto undeveloped land, and there's no incentive for us to do that. It actually devalues that parcel of land, and so therefore I think we can conclude that it's not a piece of land that's suited for that type of development.
Right. So just to summarize your evidence on this point, to move the current CFO and the expanded CFO operation outside the CFO exclusion zone would be a 200-meter move.
Approximately, when you take in setbacks from the road, yes.
And that 200-meter move would involve taking farmland and cropland out of production.
Absolutely.
And it would involve new infrastructure to support the new CFO location.
Yes, being that it's undeveloped land.
And you would lose 10% of your water rights.
That's correct. 10% that we don't have the opportunity to recoup.
Now, you're familiar with the Vulcan County Municipal District Plan?
Yes, I've become familiar.
Development Plan.
Yes, I've become familiar with it throughout this process. Yes.
Did Little Colony participate in the public hearing for the MDP?
Under my understanding that we didn't know.
Why not?
I don't think we were notified that there was an MDP or notified that there was public hearing or any notice of that type.
You didn't know about it?
No.
And how does Little Colony receive notifications from Vulcan County?
Typically, it would be registered mail, being that we're isolated.
You mentioned you're isolated. What do you mean by that?
We're 15, 20 kilometers from the village of Champion or the town of Vulcan. So we're self-sustaining. We're and community oriented. There's no reason for us to commute into town every day. In that sense, I would say that we're fairly isolated.
Fair to say that Little Colony is isolated from a community standpoint because it's self-sufficient, and it's isolated geographically because it's far from any other centers.
That's correct, yeah.
So you, for example, don't have someone going down to the municipal office on a weekly basis to see what public hearings are taking place?
No, we wouldn't have.
Does Little Colony receive notifications from Vulcan County in any other capacity other than registered mail?
Not that I'm aware of at this time, no.
Those are my questions for this witness.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Thank you, Mr. Hofer. Mr. Harrison, you can please proceed with your next witness if you care to.
Thank you. Our next witness will be Miss Ashley Kozak.
Ashley, do you wish to be sworn or affirmed?
I'm sworn, fine.
Please raise your right hand and state your name, please.
Ashley Kozak?
Ashley Kozak, do you solemnly swear the evidence you're about to give in these proceedings will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
And perhaps before we go any further, we'll just get you guys to switch seats so that Ashley can be a little bit closer. Ms. Kozak, what is your relationship with and to Little Bow Colony?
My relationship with Little Bow Colony is I am a CA and a partner at MMP. I have been an advisor to agriculture clients over the last 10 years and a direct advisor to Little Bow Colony for the past 6. MMP has been an advisor, a business advisor to the Little Bow Colony for the last 15 years, 10 to 15 years.
So fair to say that you have a good understanding of Little Bow Colony's business and economics?
Absolutely, yes.
Why don't you tell us about Little Bow's economics with respect to its poultry CFO?
Yeah, so as you heard Sam say, their poultry operation at its current location has been there for about 20 years. They do own 2,500 units of quota holdings and 1,100 units of overbase that they do currently lease out. I guess it would be more economical to use this quota for themselves, but due to the capacity constraints, they do lease it out right now. Their barn is, again, 20 years old, so their repairs and maintenance are starting to creep up. And the changes in the operational systems that are required to keep up with the supply and the demand need to happen sooner than later. As barns, infrastructure and their internal systems age, it does put a strain on the birds, and eventually it does affect their top line revenues and their net profits.
You mentioned that Little Bow Colony has a quota of a certain number of birds, but it only has approximately currently 2,500 poultry units. Why can't it make use of its entire quota?
Yeah, so the entire quota with the overbase, they can't make use of it right now because their barn is not big enough at this time. They can only place the 2,500 birds. So that's why they have to lease out their 1,100.
Well, please describe the capital costs that a poultry CFO is generally subject to.
So there's 3 major capital costs that a poultry CFO is subject to. Those would be the quota, the price per bird, infrastructure would be the next one, and inflationary costs involved. So quota would be, we all know layer operations is supply managed, and producers are required to have quota in place in their barns. The average producer in Alberta has 10,000 to 15,000 hens, so units. The larger barns could be 30 to 40,000 units, and Little Bow has 2,500. The price as of January 1st, 2021 for quota was $5.20. The only way that you can get quota is either you purchase it per hen, or there is natural progression, you can obtain it naturally. So as demand increases, as we've said with the overbase, the supply managed industry will give you some extra quota. So that 1,100 extra units of quota that they have in the future, as demand goes up, they could increase that along with every other competitor in the industry.
You mentioned that there were 3 capital costs that a CFO is subject to.
Right. So yeah,
What's
so the infrastructure costs, essentially those are you're either going to retrofit your barn or you're going to build a bigger barn. So I guess with barns and infrastructure, as they age, they become more obsolete. In our industry, we've noticed that the average lifespan of a barn would be 20 to 30 years. And or you're building a new barn because there's what we would call the regulatory environmental changes that Sam had spoke about before. When you're building a new barn, you would be always thinking to build for the future. So you're building bigger to capture the idea of getting more quota through natural abilities or through purchase. And also you're thinking about the possibility of other regulatory standards, environmental standards coming in so that you're ready for those when those come down the line. The last would be for costs of a CFO would probably be inflationary costs. Producers need to grow their top line because, as we all know in the current environment, costs are rising. So in order to stay viable, sustainable, producers really need to ensure that their top line revenue, and in supply managed, their top line revenue means more birds possibly. So to cover those inflationary costs, producers need to have more quota involved and bigger barns. Over the last 10 years, farm costs have increased 30 to 40%. So that's about 3 to 4% per year. And so that hasn't gone in conjunction with the revenues. So margins are slimming at this point.
Costs are rising due to inflation, but you mentioned that, for example, revenue is not rising to keep pace.
Yeah, I guess in the layer operation, revenues have only really risen 10 to 15%.
So a poultry CFO is generally subject then to 3 types of capital costs, the price per bird, infrastructure, and inflation. Fair to say? Fair to say,
yeah.
Now, how do these factors apply to Little Bow Colony in particular?
So as we've mentioned earlier, Little Bow does have 2,500 birds. So if they were just to retrofit their barn at this point, with the new caging system, they would only be able to place about 1,500 birds. So they would be losing out on 1,000 birds there, plus their 1,100 birds that they already have as overbase. They wouldn't be able to place those as well. So that's 2,600 birds automatically that they would be losing out on their farm for revenues. Also, when I said that barns are usually 10 to 15,000 units, right now in the barn that they have, they only have 2,500, which is on the lower end, I guess, of their competition. So to keep them viable, it would be better to have an increased barn. We would also say that going forward, Little Bow with their aging infrastructure we're not going to build a barn that's exactly the same as an old barn. Just like anything, things go to obsolete. So we want to keep up with the market and keep up with the competition, and obviously build a barn that's relevant to today and not relevant to 20 years ago. And it would be a barn that they would want to consider the fact of future changes and future abilities to get more quota, because the demand is up there, and so they want to keep viable and keep competitive in their market.
You talked a lot about the infrastructure costs with respect to and its CFO and the new regulations coming in. With respect to the incoming regulations, if Little Boat Colony is forced to keep its current operations, will it be able to afford the improvements that are required by the new regulatory environment?
No, as I said earlier, with rising costs and I guess the diminished per hen housed to 1,500, that won't be sustainable in the future. The viability of the operation will shrink, and the margins will grow smaller and smaller and thinner, and they won't be able to continue operations eventually. Overhead costs will rise over time, so we can only imagine how that would work out for them.
So to summarize them, without the ability to expand their current CFO, Little Boat Colony will not be able to justify keeping the current operations.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and that's because of not only the added cost with the new regulatory regime, but also because of the decrease in quota because of the size of the cage hens.
Yes.
Yeah. So with respect to the size of the cage hens, their current barn and their current layout, as those cages grow bigger, they have less ability, or they have the ability to put less hens into that barn. Is that fair?
Yeah. You only have so many square feet to use. Then yes, as cages get bigger, then less ability for hens to be housed.
And it's your understanding that is one of the new regulatory requirements that are coming in.
Yes.
And what can you tell me about the current market for poultry products?
The demand is strong right now in that environment, and so in the future, more quota will be available, and I'm thinking that expansion is required to stay competitive in this marketplace for sure.
Those are my questions for this witness, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kozak. And Mr. Harrison, you have Mr. Cheddar as well as a witness. Please proceed.
Yeah, so obviously Mr. Cheddar is not in our boardroom here. He'll be appearing remotely.
Yeah, and Ms. Gerbrand will have to swear or affirm him as well. So.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Do you wish to be sworn on a Bible or affirm?
Affirm, please.
Please state your name.
David Cheddar.
David Cheddar, do you solemnly affirm the evidence you're about to give in these proceedings will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Morning, Mr. Cheddar. What is your role with Little Boat Colony?
I'm the vice chair of the Hutterian Advocacy Council, and we are currently supporting members of the Little Boat Colony.
How long have you had that role for?
8 months.
And what is the Hutterian Advocacy Council?
The Hutterian Advocacy Council is an organization that's comprised of Hutterite members from across the province. Our mandate is to provide a supporting role for Hutterite colony leaderships in many areas. So, for example, we may be required facilitating discussions with non-governmental organizations and governments in general on issues that pertain to us. We feel that it's important to foster positive relationships within local and regional communities, municipality, and other agricultural organizations. We support farmers and ranchers like Little Bow Colony in their efforts to rise up to and exceed the agricultural and societal standards. Farmers and ranchers who excel in these areas are an asset to municipalities because they are role models of the agricultural landscape, and we support and advocate for this type of collaboration.
When you mentioned standards and the Hutterian Advocacy Council's role in assisting colonies and meeting and exceeding standards, you're referring to, in this case, farming standards.
That's correct. Farming standards, also environmental standards, consumer demand on food safety, food security, and also transparency as well. So it's right across the board.
Are you a member of Little Bow Colony?
No, I'm a member of Shady Lane Colony in the Peace River region, right between Grand Prairie and Peace River.
Now, in your role as vice chair, why is Little Bow's application for an expanded CFO one that you have involved yourself with?
It's complex, but I'd like to answer it by making a few points. For starters, this is a good example of farmers and ranchers like Little Bow Colony in their efforts to rise up and exceed the agricultural and societal standards. They require support from a broader perspective. Given that Little Bow Colony was unaware of the CFO exclusion zone until the recent application, this application, we recognize that given the timeline of the ongoing Vulcan County IDP process, the relocation of the colony to its current location at the behest of the Alberta government, it's apparent that the Hutterian Advocacy Council provide a broader support to Little Bow Colony. It's reasonable to conclude that the Alberta government may not have foreseen that this quarter of land that Little Bow Colony was geographically translated to would have a confined feeding operation exclusion zone superimposed onto it. Regardless, Little Bow Colony now finds itself restricted from what would otherwise be a reasonable agricultural land use of their home quarter section. So this is a concern for us. Another point I'd like to make is that Little Bow Colony has met and exceeded the rigorous confined feeding operation application process and every regulatory requirement. And given that this application is well within the Agricultural Operation Practices Act and other regulatory requirements, we would like to point out that as a result that the exclusion zone for the home quarter of Little Bow Colony is onerous and unreasonable. The new CFO improves the economic output, as just stated by the previous witness, by assisting the colony to increase its profit margin, and it's been and the lengthy economic growth restrictions at the previous location which happens to be beneath the Twin Valley Reservoir, can now be offset at the current location through this new CFO. We've looked at it, and there are no deterrents to expanding to a new CFO that we can identify. There's only benefits. For example, some of the benefits are securing the local and regional food supply, and it improves the environmental standards for the current operation. And above all this, farmers and ranchers like Little Bow Colony are committed to meeting and exceeding the consumer demand for food safety and traceability. And the consumer is playing an active role in driving that. And another point that I want to make is that I'm pretty certain that the current temperature, outside temperature in all of your locations is just as balmy as where I am. And so these record-setting heat waves are a risk to livestock. And during heat waves, we humans, we can enhance our environments, like ensuring the air conditioner is working, but our livestock depend on us to mitigate it for them. And as pointed out by Sam Hofer, the new infrastructure would improve the automation environmental control systems. So, but it's important to note that not only do heat waves create stress for animals, but widely fluctuating temperatures within the CFO facility during heat waves only amplifies the stress level on the animals. So Little Bow Colony modernizing their CFO environmental control systems within their facility through this application can only be a good thing. The new confined feeding operation improves the well-being of Little Bow Colony. It's rare to find a multi-family farming operation without some type of CFO. And similarly, it's rare to find a CFO without some type of multi-family culture and social structure that encapsulates it. For most farms and ranches in Alberta, these go hand in hand. And given that this CFO application is the first in approximately 20 years, it will certainly strengthen the social fabric of Little Bow Colony. And then the final point that I want to make is the impacts of a denial of this permit sets a concerning note for other, for existing confined feeding operations and agriculture in general across Alberta, when and where discrepancies exist between AOPA, the MDPs, and the IDPs. So we request that the NRCB board exercises its discretion and to grant this application to Little Bow Colony. We understand that each confined feeding operation application is unique. We also request that the NRCB considers this application as precedents in future confined feeding operation applications that meet and exceed AOPA, but are unreasonably stifled by municipal development plans and or intermunicipal development plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions for this.
Thank you, Mr. Cheddar. I think what we'll do now is proceed on to the opportunity to question Little Bow Colony. Vulcan County, Mr. Schneider, you're up first.
Great, thank you. I have a couple questions to direct to the applicant there. First up is what is the proposed plans for the barn that is currently in operation if a new facility were to be constructed?
The proposed plan is to take the current facility out of operation and use it, just repurposed for other farm use. What we plan on doing is our turkeys and ducks are raised predominantly outside, and we would like for the initial, when they're young birds, to put them in that facility and house them so they have protection.
Thank you. Next question is, what technical documents have been supplied to show the site's suitability for this proposed barn?
Maybe some mapping.
Yeah, I can provide the exhibits to the witness. Is that okay, Madam Chair?
Yes, please do so, Mr. Harrison.
So I'm providing document 3 to the witness from the exhibit list.
So could you just explain your question a little bit, please?
Yes, we're just asking for some further information on what has been done to determine that this site is suitable for the barn that you are proposing.
We're proposing the facility on already developed land, being that it's within the quarter. So getting the infrastructure such as gas, water, and all of that in place is readily available to us and easily accessible.
Has there been any third-party review done of your plans to determine site suitability?
No. I would like to object to the question, Madam Chair, and just ask that the question be specified as to what type of third-party review is being requested in the question.
My apologies, I will rephrase that to, has a third-party environmental assessment been done to determine site suitability for this proposed barn?
Again, I'll just query as to whether it's a biodiversity environmental review, water, wetland environmental review, just a few different environmental reviews.
I'll leave it general. Has any type of environmental review been done to determine site suitability by a third party?
No.
Okay, thank you. We have no further questions at this time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schneider. Field Services, Ms. Vance, do you have any questions for Little Bow Colony?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Field Services does not have any questions for Little Bow Colony.
Thank you, Ms. Vance. Mr. Kennedy, do you have any questions for Little Bow Colony?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have one or two questions, and the first one may have already been answered. But Mr. Hofer, when did you become aware that your confined feeding operation was located in the county's confined feeding operation exclusion zone?
When the approval officer submitted his decision, that's when we become aware.
And what is your understanding of the purpose for the county establishing that exclusion zone?
My understanding is that it's with the border of Willow Creek and possibly protection of waterways.
Purely environmental reasons, is that your understanding?
Yes, that is my understanding.
And in terms of managing your CFO facilities in proximity to the Little Bow River, can you give us a quick summary of what you identify as the on-site risks from the confined feeding operation?
I would assess there's not very substantial risk in due to the fact that it's dry manure. Its storage it's in the proposed manure facility meets AOPA's liner regulations. Not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, well, perhaps more broadly, one of the points that you made, I believe, in answering a question from Mr. Harrison was there was an environmental benefit from moving this facility further away from the Little Bow River. And implicit in that answer is there might be an inherent risk from the current facilities. And I'm trying to get an understanding of what that risk might be. So
it's basically just based off of the proximity to that waterway and the facility.
And from your CFO facilities and from all of your CFO facilities on the site, does it move from that facility toward the Little Bow River naturally?
No.
Sorry, I just want to make sure we got the question, just because there was a lot of freezing there. The question was, from the CFO facility, does manure move from that CFO facility?
Yeah, and Mr. Harrison, the question related to all of the facilities and how generally how manure is managed and what risks those facilities pose to the Little Bow River Reservoir.
I would say that it's minimal due to the fact that we have liquid manure storage and basins, catch basins in place.
And Mr. Hofer, the current municipal development plan is, I think it is dated 2012, and these things are updated every 10 years or so. Does the colony anticipate as the county updates its municipal development plan, it would actively participate in whatever revisions might arise?
I would assume so, yes. If it affects our operations and our future of our operations, absolutely.
Thank you. And Mr. Shetter, I think this question is for you. Is this in terms of municipal development plans and county's adoption and revision to plans, is this something that your group would be engaged with on behalf of your constituents?
Yes, I believe we'd be very interested in participating in that process.
Thank you. And Mr. Hofer, how do you anticipate that the county becoming aware when the county initiates its next revisions to its municipal development plan? Do you believe they'll reach out to you, or do you think you're going to have to actively watch and be aware when they initiate that process?
Based off of the past, I think we would have to stay current with what's happening within the county and keep ourselves updated to engage in those kinds of events.
And Mr. Hofer, do you have a precise distance between the new or proposed facility and the Little Bow River Reservoir?
Negative, we do not have a precise location, but we can tell you off of satellite mapping that's within 1,600 meters.
Within 1,600 meters, how much within? Do you have an idea of that?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, witnesses. Those are my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Ms. Stewart, do you have any questions for Little Bull Colony?
I do. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I ask the document manager to pull up Exhibit 8, Vulcan County's hearing submission? And my question will be to Little Bo, perhaps Mr. Hofer, but whoever can appropriately answer the question once I've stated it. So if you go to page 2 of the letter. And point number 4, which refers to municipal setbacks. And I apologize if this was somewhere in material that I didn't see, but I note that the county said that as stated in number 4, the application did not include setback distances, and therefore Vulcan County cannot confirm if the project is in compliance with setback requirements, and they state 38.1 meters from the center line of the road and 7.6 meters from the property line. Mr. Hofer, or perhaps anyone else with Little Bo, can you confirm if the proposed site is in compliance with those county setback requirements?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. And document manager, can I ask you to pull up Exhibit 3, which is the technical document, Part 2? And man, that's fast. Document managers do a great job. Can I ask you to go to PDF page 23 of 29? Can you confirm that that is the proposed building site for the poultry expansion?
I can, yes.
And if we just scroll up document manager so we can see the writing at the top, there's a note, it says AO note, approval officer note, that the topography is flat. Can you tell me what your observations are about the topography in that area and whether you agree with that statement?
I would agree with that statement. It is predominantly flat.
And when you say predominantly flat, do you have any description that would clarify that?
There's no visible indentation in the topography, so I would conclude that it is flat.
Okay, thank you. And now to scroll back, document manager, to the more of the actual land in the photo. Just scroll, that's perfect, thank you. It appears to me that manure has been spread on that quarter. Can you tell me, is that correct?
I can't say for certain, but it could be possible.
Do you spread manure on this quarter?
It used to be our garden, actually, so we haven't in the past, but it could be possible that there was some manure this spring spread on that parcel.
Thank you. And are you aware, do you have any restrictions from spreading manure on that site?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, thank you very much. In the same exhibit number 3, PDF page 12 of 29, I believe. Okay, so again, that's faster than I can actually look at my questions. So in the first paragraph, it talks about, it refers to an unnamed tributary that originates at the southwest corner of the CEO and defines it as ephemeral with a poorly defined channel. Can you describe the character of the water movement from, well, first of all, do you agree that there is an ephemeral unnamed tributary on the southwest corner of the site?
That is possible, yes.
Can you describe what the character of that water movement would be in that area?
It predominantly moves to the southwest. Like you're referring to the slope of the topography?
I'm referring to what this what is referred to in this technical document when the approval officer says that there is an unnamed tributary that originates at the southwest corner and has a poorly defined channel that kind of moves southwest of that proposed site. And I guess my question is to be more clear. Would you agree with the statement or disagree that that is ephemeral in nature and you know, basically meaning is it just a transitory transitory movement of water that occurs briefly, or has it a greater degree of permanence than that?
We don't see, I could say that we don't see water flowing continuously. No, I'm not sure as to what the approval officer is referring to there, but based on your question, no, there's no water flowing continuously.
Do you ever see water flowing from there?
I haven't, no.
Okay, no, thank you very much. It was stated earlier, and Mr. Kennedy referred to this as well, that the expansion of the poultry barn, that approval would result in an increased separation of 400 meters because of the location of the existing poultry barn. Ms. Kozak spoke to the lack of economic sustainability of the unexpanded poultry facility, and you described that if the expansion application is approved, the current facility would move, you know, turkeys or young ducks, if I got that right, to the facility. Did I get that right?
Yes.
No. Okay, thank you. And so I'm just wondering if your application to expand the operation were to be denied, would you maintain recognizing you, as you stated, couldn't maintain the 2,500 bird level at the existing location, would you maintain it at the 1,500 bird level required to meet the upgraded animal well-being requirements? Or what would you do with that? If it were to be denied, what would you do with that existing facility? Would you continue to operate it?
Well, as Ms. Kozak alluded to, that the feasibility just on a financial perspective is probably not feasible.
Okay.
Due to the upgrades necessary and the overhead costs.
Okay, and with that, those are my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Mr. Graham, do you have any questions for Little Bow Colony?
Not at this time, thank you.
Great. I guess this is kind of a broad question that I have for the colony. With this, if this was approved and the buildings would move 400 meters away, what would you believe to be any difference in environmental protection or lack of protection? Like, you would be increasing the amount of manure on site, you would be increasing the amount of birds. How would you deal with any, I'll just say, environmental differences from what you have now to what you're proposing?
Due to the proximity to the waterway, and with it being further away, it's possible that there'd be less risk in the runoff and the manure or what have you affecting the environment and the waterway.
All right, thank you. And that's the only question that I had. Is there any redirect evidence from Little Bow Colony?
Just a brief redirect, Madam Chair. If I could ask that we go to back to page 23 of Exhibit 3. And this is for Mr. Hofer. Mr. Hofer, you recall answering questions from Vulcan County with respect to whether any third-party environmental reviews had taken place with respect to the expanded CFO?
Yes.
Now, is the proposed site of the new expanded CFO near any wetlands?
No.
You recall answering questions from board counsel, Mr. Kennedy, as well as the board chair with respect to the location of the CFO to the Little Bow River?
Yes.
Now, what types of safeguards does Little Bow Colony have with respect to its current CFO operations and the impact of manure on the river from that CFO operation?
The current?
Yes.
I'm assuming you're talking about our manure storage.
Yes.
So the current manure storage facility is basically an open shelter. It's open to air shelter, concrete lined, whereas the proposed facility would be a closed, environmentally controlled storage.
And how close to the CFO operation would the new manure storage facility be?
It would be attached.
Okay. Those are my questions on redirect.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Because we did have redirect evidence, we will give parties an opportunity to question on the redirect. Vulcan County, Mr. Schneider, do you have any questions on the redirect?
Vulcan County has no questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Vance?
Field Services has no questions on the redirect. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
I have no questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Stewart?
I have no questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Graham?
Questions at this time, thank you.
Okay, and I have no questions as well. Thank you, Little Bow Colony, for your direct evidence. We're through this portion of the proceedings, so I think it's probably a good time for us to take a break, for everybody to maybe grab some ice water in this lovely weather that we've all been talking about. My clock says that it is 10:38. How about we get back together again at 10:50, and we will begin with direct evidence from Vulcan County.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, we might just keep our video off to make sure that we're able to stream it okay on our end.
Certainly. Okay, is Vulcan County here?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I believe everyone is here then because I see all of our panel. I know the colony has turned off their cameras so that they will have better, I'll call it reception, but they are here. So we will resume and we will start with direct evidence from Vulcan County. Mr. Schneider, will you please lead us?
Oh, sorry, there we go. Sorry, hit the mute button there. Okay, as far as Vulcan County's presentation goes, I'll refer to the April 8th letter from Vulcan County.
Okay. Excuse me, sorry, Mr. Schneider. Before anyone provides evidence, we do need to have them sworn in or affirmed.
Yep, sworn in's fine.
Okay, Ms. Gerbrandt, would you please help?
Mr. Schneider, will you be giving evidence?
Yes, I will.
Okay. Do you wish to be sworn or affirmed?
Sworn.
Please raise your right hand and state your name, please.
Jason Schneider.
Jason Snyder, do you solemnly affirm, sorry, do you solemnly swear the evidence you're about to give in these proceedings will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, self be God?
I do.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Erickson.
Yes.
Thank you. Do you wish to be sworn or affirmed?
Sworn.
Raise your right hand and state your name, please.
Ann Erickson.
Ann Erickson, do you solemnly swear the evidence you're about to give in these proceedings will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who else do we have there, Mr. Snyder? Can you help me?
We have Mr. Dick joining us remotely.
Right. Mr. Dick, where are you? There he is.
Hello.
Hello. Do you wish to be sworn on a Bible or affirmed?
I can affirm.
Please state your name.
Ryan Dick.
Ryan Dick, do you solemnly affirm the evidence you're about to give in these proceedings will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Is that it?
Yes,
Mr. Schneider? Okay.
Yes, it is.
Mr. Schneider, please proceed.
Great, thank you. So I'll just refer to the April 8th letter that was sent from Vulcan County. Those were just the response to the questions that were asked by the NRCB during the application process. I don't have anything else to add on that. It was just this, our response to the questions that were asked of us. And that included if this application was in a CFO exclusion zone, which this application did fall within our exclusion zone. A few points that I would just like to add on that. The exclusion zone was established with the ratification of the municipal development plan in 2012. This area was included in the development plan. It was once again noted in the intramunicipal development plan that was completed in conjunction with Willow Creek in 2015. I will just note that the boundaries of that exclusion zone did not change in 2015. They were simply just noted. It was not expanded or changed in any way from the MDP of 2012. I will just make a note in regards to notification. Vulcan County's notification process on any development plan, whether it's an intramunicipal development plan or a municipal development plan, is that all affected landowners that would be included in the plan area do receive a direct mail out. So in 2012, the applicant would have received a direct mailing. In addition to that, our policy in 2012 was we also sent a copy of the Vulcan Advocate to every ratepayer in Vulcan County. And as per our I guess under the MGA notification requirements, we did run notification of the municipal development plan in the newspaper in 2 consecutive weeks. So the applicant would have also received the Vulcan Advocate with that notification. The applicant also would have received the notification on the Willow Creek 2015 IDP, as they were also in that notification area. It would be sent to the registered landowner on title. So it would have, whoever is registered with land titles would have been the one to receive that letter. That's Vulcan County's policy, as well as that also puts us into alignment with the MGA for notification requirements. Speaking to the CFO exclusion zone, I will just refer to section 20 of AOPA, which does refer that municipalities are able to set CFO exclusion zones. That is also confirmed with section 632 and 633 of the Municipal Government Act. So putting in these exclusion zones is an option for municipalities to do. Back in 2012, the reasoning for putting these exclusion zones in was the protection of the water bodies within Vulcan County. Those exclusion zones were applied to all water bodies within Vulcan County. This area was not treated any differently than every other water body within Vulcan County, and that's therefore it was made to protect the water bodies from things like seasonal runoff, and it was applied evenly across the county there. As far as I think that kind of covers, why these exclusion zones have been put in place. And like I had mentioned, they've been in place since 2012. It had been mentioned earlier as far as looking at revising them. They do get typically revised on a 10 to 15 year pattern. Some of that just depends on factors within the municipality, but this one has not been modified since 2012. I think that that basically covers it. We were sent the referral letter. We saw the application like the general public and like everybody else, and we have provided our response to the 4 questions. And I don't think we have anything further to add on those 4 questions. And I will just ask if our manager of development or our planning advisor have anything else they'd like to add at this time, and then we'll be ready for questions.
Thank you. I would just like to briefly speak on the municipal development plan, and I would suggest that we are now just completing our intermunicipal development plans and recognize that our MDP will require an update. And so I would hope that that starts and commences in 2022. And that at that time we would engage in some meaningful conversation with stakeholders within the county, and obviously that would include operators of confined feeding operations. I'm unsure of Little Bow's timeline and if there would be opportunity to engage in that conversation and update the MDP in order to come together for this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Erickson. Will Ryan Dick be providing any evidence for Vulcan County?
I think not at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Schneider, is that all for direct evidence from the county?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, now we have an opportunity to question Vulcan County. And first up is Little Bow Colony. Mr. Harrison, do you have any questions for the county?
I do. I'll be asking Mr. Schneider questions. Mr. Schneider, I can jump into it, Madam Chair?
Yes, please do.
Mr. Schneider, you recall providing evidence that you or that Vulcan County had provided notice of the municipal development plan and the intermunicipal development plan to Little Bow Colony.
I reiterated the notification process that Vulcan County follows. Yes.
Now you did not. You were not the one who sent that correspondence to Little Bow Colony, did you?
I was not on council at the time of 2012.
You weren't even on council at the time.
Nope, that is why I highlighted our notification process that Vulcan County used at the time and currently still uses.
And who was it who the county placed the responsibility upon to send that notification out?
That would fall to the chief administrative officer, would be the one that would be ultimately responsible to make sure that the correspondence was sent out.
Sorry, Mr. Harrison, sometimes you're hard to hear or understand.
I'm sorry. I will try. Is it?
Sorry?
Yeah, just looking at my audio settings to see if I can improve them at all. Is that better?
That's good. Thank you.
And to the best of your information and knowledge, Mr. Schneider, the Little Bow Colony is within the CFO exclusion zone in the municipal development plan, correct?
That is correct.
And it's in the CFO exclusion zone for the Willow Creek IDP.
It is highlighted in the Willow Creek IDP to show that there is a CFO exclusion zone in that area, yes.
Yeah, I just want to confirm that Little Bow Colony is in both exclusion zones.
Could you please restate your question or repeat your question, sorry?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that Little Bow Colony is in both the MDP exclusion zone and the IDP exclusion zone.
It is in the MDP exclusion zone, and that exclusion zone is mentioned in the IDP. But it is, yeah, it is mentioned in both documents, yes.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I would like to put two documents side by side to the witness. I think the best way for me to do that is to share my screen, and I just canvass whether that would be acceptable to the board.
Mr. Kennedy, are there any issues with that?
If we could just clarify, Mr. Harrison, are we using existing exhibits that you're bringing up and just putting them side by side?
Yes, I could, and I could direct
And I don't have an objection. I'm just not sure whether technically that we haven't done that before in a hearing. So perhaps we could rely on.
So what I have, let me try this.
They've asked me whether I want to start my, oh.
Okay. Can everyone see what we are seeing?
Yes.
Okay. So on the right is the IDP that is at Exhibit 10. And on the left is the Municipal Development Plan. Now the MDP was not exhibited, but I only plan on using language from the MDP that is contained at page 7 of Exhibit 2. And so that language is with respect to the CFO that is located on page 21 of the IDP. You should see it there on your screen. So you have policy 4.1 here, which is stated on, like I said, on page 7 of Exhibit 2. And then on the IDP, I'm turning to policy 4.3.4. Is everyone able to see that? Can you see that, Mr. Schneider?
Yeah, it's quite small, but I got the page numbers from you.
Okay, great. Okay, so policy 4.1 of the MDP reads, new confined feeding operations, CFOs, are not permitted to be established, and existing confined feeding operations are not permitted to expand within the exclusion areas as shown on map in Appendix B. And I'll repeat my question earlier. You would agree that Little Bow Colony does appear in the CFO exclusion zone on the map in Appendix B, correct?
Which map are you referring to?
This is the map in Appendix B, and you'll see that our client's little slice of heaven is right over here. Right here. You see my cursor there?
You are highlighting over both highlighted and non-highlighted areas. It's quite small on your screen there.
Fair enough, yes. But you did answer the question earlier that the CFO exclusion zone, Little Bow Colony was in both CFO exclusion zones. So I just wanted to show you there that it is in both areas. So just to repeat, clause 4.1 of the MDP, new confined feeding operations are not permitted to be established, and existing confined feeding operations are not permitted to expand within the exclusion areas as shown on map in Appendix B. And then on the IDP is clause 4.3.4. And it reads, any existing CFO permit holders may be allowed to expand operations within CFO exclusion areas if it is to upgrade and modernize within the requirements of AOPA and regulations, demonstrating changes will reduce negative impacts to the residents of the area. Additional environmental protection will be considered, and comments from both municipalities are received and considered by the NRCB. You see that?
I'm just trying to get to it. It's quite small on the screen here.
Yeah, and you can refer to it on Exhibit 10 if you'd like, and it's on page 12 of Exhibit 10. So let me know when you've had a chance to review that.
And your question on that one, just to repeat, is?
I haven't provided you my question yet. My question is, you would agree with me that there's a conflict between the IDP and the MDP, would you not?
I would say that they are not the same. They are not word for word the same, no.
Right. But one permits an expansion to existing CFOs and the other does not, correct?
One does not and one says may.
Okay. Has Vulcan County given any consideration to how conflicts between municipal development plans and intermunicipal development plans are resolved?
Sorry, Mr. Harrison, I missed the end of your question.
Oh, sorry, I'll repeat it. Has Vulcan County given any consideration to how a conflict between a municipal development plan and an intermunicipal development plan is resolved?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer that one. I think it was stated by our planning department that our MDP will be looked for revision or updated in the future to address any of those as these IDPs were all put in place after the MDP was ratified in 2012. So at this point, I would say the answer would be we are looking at updating the MDP in the future once our IDP process has been completed with all of the urban and rural municipalities that we border.
Okay. Is Vulcan County aware of Section 638, Sub 3 of the Municipal Government Act that mandates that any conflict between a municipal development plan and an intermunicipal development plan is resolved in favor of the intermunicipal development plan?
Yes, that's what the MGA says.
Yeah, and so you're aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. Those are my questions for Vulcan County's witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Field Services, Ms. Vance.
Field Services does not have any questions for these witnesses. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Vance. Okay, NRCB staff and panel. We'll start with Mr. Kennedy, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Schneider, the board in setting this matter down for a hearing asked 4 questions or set 4 questions down. And the first question is identify the municipal authority's rationale for establishing the relevant provisions in the MDP. And of course, can you direct us to the part of the MDP that says these exclusion zones are established for these reasons, and so we can identify those reasons?
Yeah, if you want to give us a minute here, we can get you the page number out of the MDP that might reference that.
Take your time.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
This is Ryan Dick. I wonder if I may be able to step in and provide a little of the context. I think that the the board may be seeking, and perhaps supplement some of the responses to the questions, if that's okay.
Certainly, anything that you can do to help answer the question would be much appreciated, Mr. Dick.
Okay, firstly, I guess in terms of context, and as was stated, the MDP came into place prior to the IDP with Willow Creek, and the county is very much aware of the consistency of plans requirement in the Municipal Government Act, Section 638, that the Council for Little Bow Colony referenced. And I think it brings about something we've been grappling with and talking about with the county, the need for consistency. And of course, it's our feeling that the law should be applied fairly and consistently. That sometimes is challenging to do because we are looking to establish municipal land use provisions within the relatively narrow scope provided for municipalities in Section 20 or whatever the relevant section of AOPA is, and dealing with this multi-jurisdictional approval regime. Same sort of regime municipalities have to deal with for any types of entities where there's a provincial interest, whether it's with the AUC, AER, or the NRCB. And sometimes that's quite challenging to do. We're left at the bottom of the ladder, but we want to be involved in the process, of course, and want to be involved in planning. Maybe that's a little context, stuff the board might already know. Anyways, I say that and go on to say that in a case like this, where I do recognize the discrepancy that Mr. Harrison pointed out, and this may be an occasion where the board chooses to read down the full-on exclusion, I guess you could say, in policy section 4.1 of the MDP in favor of the more lenient policy in 4.3.4 of the IDP. That may be the outcome of this, I'm not sure. But I think what Reeve Schneider was trying to refer to was that in the IDP, we were just looking to reference the existing CFO exclusion area out of the 2012 MDP. The IDP did not establish new CFO exclusion area. And the reason we wanted to do that was to make sure that these things were consistent. Now, it looks like we may have erred in that these policies aren't identical, but that may have been somewhat intentional. I can't exactly recall or know for sure. I was involved in a limited capacity in the 2015 plan, but I don't think any of the parties with the county today were involved in the 2012 MDP. That's all I'd say for now.
Mr. Schneider and Ms. Erickson, have you found what you were looking for?
Yes, so this, as I had stated to Mr. Harrison before, I was not part of the MDP process in 2012, as I was elected in 2013 to this role. So we are going off of the documents from the public hearing. Now, I'm happy to have these sent in because they do address the rationale, and because these questions were asked during the open house process, and council at the time did provide a response as to how they were going to justify the exclusion zones, or what the reasoning was to justify the exclusion zones. I'd be happy. We'd be happy to send those in. I can read the answer here and send in the document. Whatever you would prefer.
Mr. Snyder, what I'm looking for, and my question is where do we find the explanation and the rationale within the municipal development plan?
Pages 14 and 15 refer to the confined feeding operations. I believe that's, I guess that would probably what you would be referring to.
No, well, perhaps what I am looking for is the rationale within the municipal development plan for the establishment of the exclusion zone. So the CFO exclusion zone, which is set out on the map, and looking for the rationale. So going back to the question that the board posed in its decision, which we've set down this hearing, is identify the municipal authority's rationale for establishing the relevant provisions in the MDP. And normally you look in the MDP for those relevant provisions and the justification, and that's what I'm asking for you, is to point out in the MDP the rationale for those exclusion zones.
I don't believe the council at the time put them into the MDP. Like I said, they were included in the public hearing minutes there. I would say the only rationale is that under the MGA, they established CFO exclusion zones. That's all that I would have to refer to in the MDP.
So in terms of what you would suggest this panel do, because of course it's trying to understand the planning purposes for those exclusion zones and determining whether or not that the Little Bow Colony's application should get an exemption from those exclusion zones. How do they understand what the purpose of that exclusion zone is from a planning perspective for Vulcan County?
I would say I would refer to the minutes of the public hearing that was conducted when the NDP or the MDP was being developed, and those answers were in that document, and I'd be happy to provide you a copy. But as far as reference specifically in NDP, they weren't, other than just the being able to establish them under the MGA, and then the rationale that was given during the public hearings in February of 2012.
And that exclusion zone is established at more or less 1,600 meters, and it looks like it follows quarter section boundaries as it's drawn out on the map. So is it a minimum of 1,600 meters?
I believe that was the intention, and then they went by quarter lines because the river obviously is not straight or uniform.
And can you help us understand why 1,600 meters? Why was that distance chosen?
As I stated before, I wasn't part of the MDP development, so I don't have anything to add on that one.
Well, perhaps I should ask this question first. Does the county object to the exemption requested by the Little Bow Colony?
The county has just responded to the questions asked by the NRCB, and the one asked if it was in an exemption zone, and it is. To my knowledge, we've never been asked for a waiver. That's within the NRCB's jurisdiction and not Vulcan County's. We were simply answering the questions that were asked of us, and it does fall within the exemption zone, or the CFO exemption zone.
Well, let's ask that question now. Does the county take exception with the request?
I cannot answer that. I would have to ask council. I'm simply representing the letter that we sent. So I can't speak for the rest of council, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
You understand, Mr. Snyder, that these 4 questions have been in front of the county for some time, and frankly, your answers aren't particularly helpful in understanding the county's position. So whatever you can do to kind of expand on these answers so that the board has an understanding of where Vulcan County might stand with respect to its exemption exemption zone, it would be more than helpful.
I understand, but as Your question is asking, do we oppose the exemption zone? That was not a question that was asked of Vulcan County. If we'd been asked that question, we would have been able to given you a response on behalf of council. You're asking me as one individual of a council to answer on behalf of 7. So I apologize that that's not the answer you're looking for, but if you would like that answer specifically, we can get that, but it will require the majority of council convening.
Fair. One of the questions the board asked and said it would be examining is the relevant provision reasonable and reflective of good planning? Can you provide a response from Vulcan County as to how reasonable is the exemption or the exclusion zone, and how does that reflect good planning?
I think it reflects good planning because we've uniformly these zones are uniform across these CFO exclusion zones are uniform on all the water bodies within Vulcan County. Based on the notes from the public hearing and the responses the council of the day provided, it is my opinion that the rationale was to protect the water bodies and to prevent further development around those water bodies. That's well within our mandate as a council and through the MJs to promote safe and viable communities. And I believe protecting our water sources is well within that mandate. And we are given that power to put CFO exclusion zones in areas through the MGA in section 632 and 633. So I believe due to the uniformity as well as our responsibility to create a safe and viable communities, protection of our water bodies is well within our mandate.
And I'll come back to the 1600 meters. Is there anything to support why 1600 meters was chosen as opposed to 100 meters or 3,000 meters?
I can't speak to that. At the days, that was the distance that was chosen that was felt to be reasonable and applied across the entire county of Vulcan.
And does the county of Vulcan have anything that it can put forward that would suggest that 1600 meters is necessary as an exclusion zone to protect the water body?
I believe, according to the minutes, that was just that was the number that they came up in consultation with the ratepayers and the council of the day. 1600 meters was felt to be a reasonable amount.
And I see that the same exclusion zone seems to apply around hamlets and villages. That's, I presume, for purposes other than the protection of water bodies.
That is correct. In the minutes, they also reference to preserve existing and future quality of life and reducing the potential for future land use conflicts for residents within those areas. Those areas have all been re-examined during the provincially mandated IDP process. In some areas, those exclusion zones have been expanded just as time goes on. Operations getting larger and larger. The urbans have requested further setbacks from urban areas, but those were all looked at on a case-by-case basis, with each of the 5 villages and the 1 town within Vulcan County's borders. So all 6 of those exclusion zones have been recently reviewed during the IDP, but that was just in regards to proximity to urban areas.
And is there any portion of the exclusion zone that applies to the Little Bow colony that the County of Vulcan would identify as creating a land use conflict? So is the exclusion zone where the Little Bow colony is it there for land use conflict purposes?
I can't speak directly to that because I wasn't part of those discussions, but I would say due to the uniform application of this zone to the CFO exclusion zone to all water bodies, I would say that it. I guess we could speculate, but I would say it was. I would venture a guess that, and according to the notes, that it was more in regards to proximity to water bodies is what they were concerned about at the time of February 2012.
And Mr. Schneider, you would, and I think this question is for you, you would accept that the purpose of the Agricultural Operation Practices Act, or one of the purposes, is to protect surface water bodies?
I would say it was one of the bodies that takes that into consideration, yes.
And that it establishes standards and setbacks from surface water bodies?
I believe it does, yes.
And in establishing the 1,600 meters in the MDP, did the County of Vulcan have regard for the fact that AOPA is there to address that very issue?
During the public hearings, open houses, and a consultation, they would have been referred. So I would say that they would have looked at all the provincial standards from various bodies and then made a decision accordingly. I realize that all those numbers might not match identically, but I believe under the MGA, they would have been able to make a decision that works for their area as opposed to just a general legislation. But once again, this was February of 2012, before my time on council.
Thank you. And the colony, in its submission to the board, suggested that there is not a similar exclusion zone setback on the Willow Creek side. Do you have any understanding as to whether that is true or not?
That would be a question they would need to be referred to Willow Creek. I could not speak to that.
And is that the kind of, if the County of Vulcan is interested in protecting this surface water body, is that the kind of thing that might come up in discussions when an intermunicipal development plan is on the table?
It definitely would be a topic of conversation, but ultimately every municipality has to make decisions that they feel is in the best interest of their residences. In this particular IDP, this was what we identified, that there was no request for either side to change any of their exclusion zones. We primarily just highlighted it in the document because these are areas within the IDP. These lands fall within the IDP area between Willow Creek and Vulcan County. So they were highlighted, but as far as any changes or requests for changes from either side, there were none.
And Mr. Snyder, I just want to circle back to the very first question that I asked, and the board in its decisions wants to be respectful of municipalities' purposes for establishing its planning objectives and setting those out in its municipal development plan. And when I asked that first question, it was really because I think the board's going to struggle at the end of the day understanding why the exclusion zone was established in this instance, and what planning purposes and objectives are there, because I asked you because I could not find them in the municipal development plan. Would you agree with me that it's not particularly helpful if it's not in a municipal development plan?
I would agree that that is something that would need to be updated because as I referenced before, referring to all of the rationale and the reasoning that was put into the public hearing notes. There is quite a bit of reasoning put in there, and but I cannot speak to why it was not included into the MDP as well, as I was not on council at that time.
Thank you. Thank you, County. Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Graham, we'll go to you next. Do you have any questions for Vulcan County?
Thank you. Steve Snyder, can you tell me how in 2012 your NDP was developed? Now I think you've touched on it a couple of times. Public meetings held. How was the input from the public garnered? Or was this a council, or was this more just a council document, not a input from the public?
Sorry, you were cutting out, but I think I got the gist of your question here, and that was just how the MDP was developed and what process was followed. So there were public input was sought, and open houses were held. Through the minutes of the MDP open houses, there was input that was garnered from, for example, surrounding villages. There was letters from the village of Milo, the village of Arrowwood, actually even Mr. Cumming from the NRCB is also referenced in here. The NRCB was consulted. Alberta Health Services was consulted. The County of Newell was consulted. There's also individual letters from landowners in the area that were also sent in, and the council provided responses to those in those minutes. So it was a public process, and then the I guess the input that was gathered at that point was then incorporated into the MDP at the time, and that's how that document was created.
Okay, thank you. One other question. Does this fall within an ESA, this land of the colonies?
Sorry, we'd have to refer. There was an ESA study done there, but I would have to look further into that to get you the proper answer to your question.
Okay, thank you. And it was mentioned before about an ephemeral water body. Is that part of the of what may be an ESA?
I would have to refer to that document. We received the same information. That was an assessment done by the NRCB officer during the application there. But I have no documentation to prove one way or the other. I have not seen any technical study done on this land to either confirm or deny that.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Ms. Stewart, do you have any questions for the county?
I do, Madam Chair, thank you. Although a number of them have been covered, so if you'll bear with me while I scan through my notes. I'm assuming that these will be for Mr. Snyder, Ms. Erickson, or whoever is appropriate to address each question. You know, certainly recognizing the challenge when we're talking about an MDP that was developed before your time, and perhaps this is Mr. Snyder. Are you able to speak to what the previous zoning for the quarter under discussion, the potential development site under discussion, what the previous zoning was and why it would have been zoned that way before the exclusion zone was applied?
I would assume just based on its location, majority of the land in Vulcan County is zoned rural general, pretty broad category for agriculture producing lands.
Okay, oh, thank you very much. And again, recognizing, you weren't necessarily there, but further to Mr. Kennedy's point that there's not much to go on in the NDP, but do you have a sense of what specific considerations, if any, were applied to that specific development area that's proposed, or if that area was simply part of the, albeit 1,600 meter approximate setback?
I have no evidence to suggest that this area was looked at outside of the general area. Like I said, the exclusion area was applied the same to every water body going through Vulcan County. So there's no evidence, and there was nothing in the public hearing notes to suggest that this area was treated any differently than any other area in proximity to water bodies within Vulcan County.
Okay, thank you very much. And further, I believe you stated that, again, that rationale, as you've looked at in the meeting minutes from the public consultation process that was undertaken in the development of the NDP, that the rationale for the exclusion zone was to prevent further development around water bodies and to protect water bodies. And I know you did mention that you believed in that area of the proposed CFO that it would be for water body protection. But my question relates to the development side. And can you tell me what development other than CFOs is excluded from that 1,600 meter margin that has been kind of uniformly placed across the county boundary?
So we do have setbacks from water bodies for other types of development, but in the MDP, this is specifically referenced as CFO exclusion zones, just because that is independently handled in the MGA in 632 and 633. So this was just in reference to CFO exclusion zones, but we do have other setbacks that would apply to if you were going to build a house near the water, that would fall within our land use bylaw. Those setbacks would be contained in that document.
Okay, thank you. And actually, document manager, can I ask you to bring up exhibit 11, which is the MDP plan bylaw, PDF page 20 of 44. So in this section entitled Confined Feeding Operations, we see that paragraph right at the top above the photograph. And I believe it is the, let's see, the second sentence is the preservation of agricultural lifestyles promoted and maintained through these operations. Okay, so it's the next sentence that I'm thinking of. The potential issues caused by CFOs may be mitigated through long-range planning so these nearby settlements can still enjoy the rural lifestyle of the county. Mr. Snyder, can you speak to what potential issues caused by a CFO that could be mitigated through long-term planning that you believe that statement may refer to?
I believe issues within the county's purview would be things like transportation, also, of course, proximity to urban areas. I think it's quite a general statement there, just to try to mitigate any of those issues that might come up. But obviously, the NRCB does handle quite most of the approvals, but local issues like setbacks, traffic, things of that nature do come to a council, and work with the CFOs to try to mitigate, impacts on the area and any neighbors.
Okay, thank you for that. So if you're thinking of some of those potential issues like transportation, for example, what are the differences that you see inherent in CFOs that would be different from, let's say, a more extensive agricultural operation?
I guess just to restate your question there, it's what's the differences between a smaller CFO and a larger CFO as far as impacts go? Is that where you were going?
Yeah, I think so. I think when that statement in the NDP says that the potential issues caused by CFOs can be mitigated, what would be the potential issues caused by CFOs that would require mitigation through long-range planning that would be different from, let's say, a non-CFO agricultural operation with respect to what the MDP maybe is trying to get at here?
Yeah, the statement says, some of those issues may be mitigated. One of the biggest ones is traffic. Our road systems in Vulcan County are older, so we typically do try to work with any operator or any new operator to make sure that our road system is able to handle it. We don't want to ruin the infrastructure, because that doesn't benefit county residents or the operators. So typically our public works department is quite involved in these applications, working with the applicant to try to come up with the best routes to get their product in and out. That's typically one of the biggest things, as well as our development department obviously will work with them just to make sure that any other setbacks are met, and that's usually in proximity to roads and quarter lines and things of that nature. But those are typically the issues that we handle at a local level, and other things, like odor and things like that are handled at an NRCB level. And so not necessarily anything that the county can directly mitigate with the operator. It goes, of course, to a higher body.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I'm not sure if we can bring up the exhibit if you'd like, but you may recall from my questions earlier when we looked at the technical document, we saw the photo of the site of the proposed development. Do you recall that? And there it is, because
yep, there we go.
People they can just read minds and find those things. So we've talked about the topography as described by the approval officer, both in this document and by Little Bow, that they would characterize that topography as flat. Would you disagree or agree with that?
I have no firsthand knowledge of the site, and I have no documentation in my possession to prove one way or another.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. You referred to in I think in some of your questions about whether a third-party environmental review had been undertaken for the site. Can you tell me what your understanding of the requirements are with respect to an environmental review outside of the technical requirements driven by AOPA?
It was a general question in regards to the NRCB officer's assessment that there were areas that were sloping towards the river there in the application. We were just asking if there was any further documentation that we could review, showing one way or another, as we're looking at pictures that and are unable to tell the terrain. So as far as getting any, we're just looking for some additional information on that, because I do not have any firsthand knowledge, or I have not been on the site here, so I can't offer anything from my personal experience.
Mm-hmm. Sure, I appreciate that. And I promise this is the last question. Little Bow had, I believe, addressed the question that you have in Exhibit 8, page 2 of 3, and I know if I speak slowly enough that exhibit's just going to pop up. as it does. So in number 4, about the setback distances, has that question now been answered for you?
Question number 3.
Number 4, I apologize.
Yes, I believe it has been, yes.
Okay, just to your satisfaction.
Yes, it's been answered, yes.
Okay. Madam Chair, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. I have a couple of questions. The first one flows, I guess, from one of Ms. Stewart's questions. She had asked, are there any other developments that have setbacks from water bodies? And Mr. Schneider, you had commented, well, houses is one, and I would expect that perhaps the reason for that is to keep them out of harm's way from flooding or possible erosion. But anyway, the question that I have following up on Ms. Stewart is, are you aware of if there are any other types of developments besides CFOs that have setbacks from water bodies for environmental reasons?
I believe any development around a water body would have setbacks, and we would refer to Alberta Environment for their comment. Development around lakes and rivers, it would be referred to them for the appropriate environmental setbacks, but that's each application is referred to the appropriate body if it is in proximity to water. So I use houses as an example, but I would I guess further clarify that it would be any type of development around water would have a setback, and that would be laid out in our land use bylaw, but it would also be referred to Alberta Environment if there was any additional setbacks that they would be looking for because of environmental reasons or anything that they would put out, and then the Planning Commission would make a decision based on the information that they'd received from Alberta Environment and in conjunction with the land use bylaw.
Okay, thank you. And the other question that I had has to do again with your notification method, and agreed that this would have gone back to 2012 and sooner and earlier because of how you would have notified people in advance of the open houses and such for the MDP. And you had explained to us that at that point in time, mail-outs were sent to ratepayers, as well as notification in the local paper for a couple of weeks, that sort of thing. And I guess I'm sensing a bit of a disconnect here. And I don't know if you can answer this or if you would care to presume or make a comment on it. But I find it very curious, the impact that this CFO exclusion zone that ended up in the 2012 MDP certainly directly affected and continues to affect Little Bow Colony, and yet they didn't comment on that potential CFO exclusion zone for the 2012 MDP. And my familiarity with Hutterian colonies is that they typically do expand their CFOs. I guess, does the county have any comment or anything to kind of, I guess I'll just say with regard to that, to help me perhaps understand the disconnect that I'm sensing here?
As far as who chose to comment, I can't speak to that. I would suggest that based on the letters that were sent in through the open house process that landowners some did choose to comment. I would say from experience of 8 years on council, we've held many open houses over the years, and I would say that vast majority of ratepayers typically do not comment on plans like this. They are that's just kind of the way it is. I guess unless you feel that it's really affecting you, you might not, or you might not look into it. It is a large document. So I would say that there was a lot of input put into it from different bodies and members of the public. And I can't speak why Little Bow or would have not commented on it. But it was open to public comment I guess that would have started, this process would have started late 2011 and gone into, I believe, just the dates on these are, beginning of 2012 is when a lot of the letters were sent in and the public hearing was held.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schneider.
Sorry, I'll just let our manager of development services supplement that question, if that's all right.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to point to the MDP. It does have a section on public participation on page 2 of the municipal development plan document. It does provide a brief summary of just what was undertaken by the county, and it discusses a direct notification by letter, newspaper advertisements, the holding of an open house, and the holding of a public hearing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Erickson. And that's it for questions from me. So Vulcan County, you now have an opportunity to submit redirect evidence if you would like.
I don't think we've really got a whole lot to add at this point. I guess as far as the referral letter, this referral was for a new barn and not an upgrade of an existing barn. I realize that it's going to be replacing a barn, but it was a new one. So I believe that's why the questions were sent on behalf of the NRCB. We do receive expansion requests for additional capacity on existing facilities on a somewhat regular basis. I think that would be the only clarification I'd point out on this one, is that our comments were in reference to a brand new barn. This wasn't in reference to upgrading of an existing facility. But other than that, I think we've covered our points here, and I'll allow if our manager of development and planning or our planning advisor, Mr. Dick, if they have anything further they'd like to add before we close.
Not from me, thank you.
Madam Chair, I would say just one or two things quickly. I think, it may be obvious, but the approach with the 2012 MDP, this represents the first time the county addressed CFOs. It's the first MDP the county had since AOPA came into place. So it's the first look at this. And so I think it made sense that we attempted to approach things consistently, at least with respect to water courses, and sticking with the 1 mile. 1 mile is often used, of course, in rural areas. And we also use that. There were some questions about what other developments require, say, a 1 mile setback. And in our land use bylaw, for example, we require industrial developments within the rural industrial district to be set back 1 mile from environmentally significant areas, which generally correspond with river valleys. That was another point I was going to make here. Just trying to recall. I think the other thing I was going to say was and the South Office of the NRCB has communicated to us in the past that one of the best ways to go about establishing municipal land use provisions is through exclusionary zoning. Exclusionary zoning because it's very clear. It's a hard yes or no. And that's typically been the approach in the region, not just in Vulcan County, as to how to go about establishing municipal land use provisions. There's no tests or conditions. It's a yes or no. I think what we've identified with Vulcan County in the past year or two and doing all these new IDPs is that that may not be the best route moving forward for the county. And I think with respect to this particular application, I might be bold to say, but a small barn like this could be seen as innocuous. But with exclusionary zoning, we're looking at anything that requires an approval, whether it's 350 head of cattle or 35,000 head feedlot. So that approach in its nature is limiting and challenging. So I think we may be looking to look at things a little differently in the future. But as it stands right now, I think the county's concern is that we want the laws to be applied fairly and consistently as much as is possible and reasonable.
Thank you, Mr. Dick. Mr. Schneider, does that complete the redirect evidence from Vulcan County?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. So we do give other parties an opportunity to ask any questions they may have on the redirect. So we'll start with Little Bow Colony. Do you have any questions for Vulcan County?
We have no further questions. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Ms. Vance, Field Services.
Just 1 second. Yes, we do not have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Kennedy,
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Graham,
Most didn't work. No questions at this time. Thank you.
thank you. Ms. Stewart,
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no additional questions, and thank you so much for the responses previously.
okay, and I have no additional questions either. So the next section that we have is rebuttal evidence from Little Bow Colony. Mr. Harrison, do you expect that you will have some rebuttal evidence?
Little Bow Colony has no further evidence.
Okay, so we're at the point now where we're at closing arguments, and we're at the point now where it's also noon. So I am going to suggest that perhaps we take a lunch break. It will give parties a chance to digest the information, prepare their closing oral arguments, and then when we resume, it will be closing arguments. The other thing we could do is just continue on with closing arguments and adjourn the hearing. So I guess I'll just kind of canvass for what your wishes are. And we'll start with Little Bow Colony. What would you prefer?
I think we'd like to go into closing arguments, but I know everyone's probably getting hungry, so always sensitive to that.
Vulcan County, what would you prefer?
We would ask to continue into closing arguments.
Okay, looks like that's what the preference is, and certainly our stomachs might be feeling a bit empty, but that's what people would like to do, and that's great. We will then proceed into closing arguments. Little Bow Colony, you're up first.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again, panel members. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to be able to make submissions and to this board today. I want to really kind of start my submissions. Don't think it's going to be much surprise, but really focused on the board, the review's decision, and how it wanted to proceed today. And that's by looking at what I will term as the sources of discretion that this board has to approve this review. And in my submission, those two sources of discretion really come from, the first comes from the interpretation of the municipal development plan, and then in conjunction with the intermunicipal development plan. And then the second source of discretion, as we noted in the board's decision, was from section 25 sub 4 sub G of AOPA. And I'd like to take the board through my submissions on those two sources, because I think that each provides an independent mechanism for this board to approve of my client's application for an expanded CFO. And I'll start with the first source, which is the interpretation of the municipal development plan and the intermunicipal development plan. And what I'd like to do, again, with your permission, Madam Chair, is just pull up, if you would grant me that indulgence, the side-by-side of the MDP and the IDP.
Sure, we've seen these already, so certainly.
So we should have here the side-by-side of the municipal development plan on the left-hand side, and I'll show you, there is the municipal development plan. And on the right-hand side, the IDP between Vulcan County and the MD of Willow Creek. And as I noted in my cross-examination of Mr. Schneider, Reeve Schneider, there is a discrepancy between, there is a discrepancy between the CFO exclusion areas as they are stated in both the NDP and the IDP. And I would characterize it as being the NDP is somewhat more restrictive, whereas the IDP has an allotment for operations that are looking to expand and that are looking to expand with an eye to mitigation as well. And if we look at first the MDP policy at clause 4.1 there, although it does say that existing CFOs are not permitted to expand, it does at the same time, one breath later in the second sentence, note that although new CFOs and expansions to existing CFOs are prohibited in the exclusion area, improvements with respect to the maintenance and or environmental protection of an existing CFO are permitted. And my submission on this point is that what this board is going to first look to grapple with, in my estimation, is whether what my clients are looking to do would meet the requirement of an improvement, and thereby with respect to the maintenance and or environmental protection of the existing CFO. And I think that that's important to qualify, because if this board does find that my clients are improving their existing CFO and that the improvement will meet the certain enhanced environmental standards and maintenance standards, then I would submit that they will fall within policy 4.1 and the allotment in the NDP to be able to expand that CFO. And when we're interpreting legislation such as the municipal development plan, which is a legislative enactment, rights that are granted to parties or provisions that remove rights to parties, such as a CFO exclusion zone, have to be read with an eye to minimize the rights that are being taken away. And that they have to be read with the idea that when you are taking away rights that would otherwise be granted to citizens or individuals, then those read downs need to be read strictly. And that is what I would submit ought to be read here. That there does appear in the MDP on the face of it a distinction between, yes, we're not going to allow any expansion of CFOs, but if you are maintaining or improving your CFO or upgrading it, then you are allowed to, then that is an allowable act. And when we determine whether my client meets the condition that is established here as to whether they are maintaining and upgrading their facilities, the uncertainty that is, I would say, endemic to clause 4.1 of the MDP ought to be read in my client's favor. And that becomes more evident, I would submit, when you see the side-by-side with the IDP. And the IDP section, or clause 4.3.4, is the equivalent to clause 4.1 in the MDP. And clause 4.3.4 reads that expansions are permitted insofar as those expansions will assist in reducing the negative impacts. And I would submit that from my client's evidence today, that is clearly what is happening, that the expansions are there to pay for upgrades to animal welfare. The expansions are there to pay for enhanced environmental features. The expansions are there in order to maintain this CFO, with respect to inflationary pressures, and to make this CFO a more efficient operation. Now, as I noted in my cross-examination of Reeve Schneider, the MGA does speak to conflicts between NDPs and IDPs. And with your permission, Madam Chair, I could pull up the section of the MGA so that we could review it. And it is section 638 sub 3 of the MGA.
Mr. Kennedy?
Yes. Yeah, well, by all means, statutory references we can introduce. I'm hoping Mr. Harris, there he has it, which far quicker than I could find it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. So when AOPA references municipal development plans in the legislation, what it does is it references it by source to the Municipal Government Act. And Municipal Government Act does not define a municipal development plan. What the Municipal Government Act does is it defines statutory plans generally. And you'll see here that statutory plans are both intermunicipal development plans and municipal development plans. And so I think that it's not news to the board that IDPs have just as much force with respect to AOPA and the requirement that that IDPs and NDPs be given consideration as MDPs. And if you look at the consistency of plans clause, which is 638 and sub 3 of that clause, it reads, an intermunicipal development plan prevails to the extent of any conflict or inconsistency between municipal development plan, an area structure plan, or an area redevelopment plan in respect of the development of the land to which the conflicting or consistent plans apply. So if we look back here at the IDP, it is clear that there is, at the very least, an inconsistency. And I would submit that that was at least acknowledged by Reeve Schneider during cross-examination, is that there is an inconsistency between these two plans, if not an outright conflict. One appears to prohibit expansions, whereas the other permits expansions given certain qualifications. I would submit that given that the IDP is granted preference over the NDP with respect to conflicts, that the IDP is the plan that this board ought to be applying as it pertains to my client. And there was no contradictory evidence put forward by any party that what my client is doing here is upgrading and maintaining this facility and the CFO operation for environmental stewardship, for animal welfare, and to pay for the costs relating to those upgrades. I think that when we go through the MDP as well, and I think that this was a point that perhaps Mr. Kennedy was alluding to in some of his questions, we have objective sections within the NDP, and purpose sections within a statute are really the guiding light for the interpretation of statutory objects. Of course, this is a legislative instrument, and so I would submit that the same interpretation ought to be granted in this case. And when we look at the objective underlying the municipal development plan, what we have here is a real desire to uplift the community, not to prevent, but to enable. And if we look through it, for example, to protect good quality agricultural land while allowing for subdivision development to occur for a variety of uses as specified in the land use bylaw. You heard my client's testimony today that the only other available site to this colony was agricultural land. And so for this board to prevent the approval from going forward and to develop that agricultural land in a way that removes that production is not going to be beneficial and is not going to be, I would submit, in coherence with the clear objection or objective of the municipal development plan. We keep going through the objectives here to encourage development opportunities within Vulcan County, to expand the county's assessment base while limiting conflicts with existing land users or uses. My client noted that there is no conflict with respect to this CFO. There is not a single party that has raised an objection to this CFO, including, it would appear, Vulcan County itself. And then the second last sentence of the objective is to continue to promote intermunicipal cooperation. And if we continue through the objective of the NDP, or the guiding lights of the NDP, we have another provision, it's page PDF page 28, but page 22 of the NDP discusses the idea that intermunicipal cooperation between districts is a real essential point to this municipal development plan. And that provides further credence to my submission that the IDP ought to be applied over any conflict with the MDP. When you have an MDP that is focused very heavily on intermunicipal cooperation, which is a laudable goal for this county, then that ought to be elevated by this board and not disregarded by ignoring the idea or the fact that the IDP, the Willow Creek IDP, does allow for expansions to existing CFOs. And then the last provision, which is the provision of the IDP that I think bears some relevance, is page 29 of the PDF, which is page, 19 of the IDP. And clause 5.2.8 establishes what I would term as an indication of preeminence of the IDP over the MDP. And it reads, a newly proposed Vulcan County statutory plan, excluding municipal development plan or amendment that will have an impact on the plan area, shall be referred to the MD of Willow Creek, number 26, for comment prior to a public hearing. When we look through planning with counties generally, and we include in intermunicipal cooperation clauses that require those planning documents to be referred to the other side, that I would submit as more evidence that this county intended for the IDP to take preeminence over the NDP. I would submit that in either case, under either the NDP or the IDP, and I'll pull up those two sections again. Submit that both permit for development of CFOs and expanding CFOs. I would acknowledge that the development under the MDP is more restrictive, but it still permits for that development. Whereas in the IDP, the ability to expand an existing CFO is read directly into the legislative instrument itself. In either case, this expansion is required so that the colony can have sufficient funds to be able to maintain these operations. The question was posed in Cross that how would the colony react to the situation where this application were to be denied? And the response by Mr. Hofer was unequivocal, and that the operation would not be viable any longer. And I don't think that that was the intent of either the MDP or the IDP. I think that when we are looking at elevating people, it is not to close down operations, but to raise them up and improve them, not only for the betterment of the environment, but also the betterment of their own individual communities. Now, my next submission, as I noted, was the other aspect of this board's discretionary power, and that's with respect to section 25 sub 4 sub G of AOPA. And I won't pull that up on the screen, mostly because I could pull it up on the screen, Madam Chair, if you would find it beneficial to do so.
Sure, if please do.
So section 25 sub 4 sub G provides that in conducting a review, the board must have regard to, but is not bound by, the municipal development plan. And there is some statutory interpretation or some jurisprudence on this provision, and that comes from the 2011 Alberta Court of Appeal decision in Grow North Inc. and Alberta NRCB. And I can provide you with a citation of that. It's 2011 ABCA 236. And in that leave to appeal decision, the court held and confirmed the test under section 25 sub 4 sub G, which was that the issue that the board has to grapple with is whether there is a compelling argument to override an existing municipal development plan. So I started off my submissions with outlining that by approving this expansion to the existing CFO, this board is not going to override the municipal development plan. And I walked the board through my submissions on that basis. But I would submit that separate and apart from that argument, insofar as this board finds that the expansion to the existing CFO does override a municipal development plan, then I would submit that there is compelling reasons to override the MDP that we've just looked at. Now, the arguments that I'm going to present are fourfold. First, that there's a conflict with the IDP such that that is a compelling reason unto itself to override an existing MDP. Second, that lack of notice or participation by my client in the municipal development process is another compelling reason. Third, that my client has met and exceeded all other requirements, including setbacks, and that will go to also the environmental improvements that my client is going to be making with this expansion application. And then finally, that expansion is necessary to pay for modernization of this facility and this confined feeding operation for environmental reasons, as well as welfare and comfort reasons for the animals. And that is a compelling reason to permit the expansion to proceed. But I would also, after hearing Vulcan County and cross-examination, I would add a fifth ground, and that's that there is no opposition, not even it would appear from Vulcan County itself, to my client's CFO application. The question was posed to Vulcan County as to whether they are taking a position on it. And the answer that I heard was that they were not, but that they could not call a full council to determine whether to waive any objection to my client's CFO. If I go through those 5 reasons, I'll skip over the first because that involves the conflict with the IDP, which I would submit as a compelling reason to override a municipal development plan. And we've already looked at that in my initial submission. The second, I would note that the lack of notice that my client received and the participation in the NDP process really harkens back to how my client came to be at its current location. They left their colony in Willow Creek in good faith, and they did so for the betterment and improvement of lives of many farmers and ranchers in southern Alberta who benefited from the project, the Twin Valley Dam project. When they came to their current location, their CFOs were all grandfathered in. And obviously at that juncture, there was no CFO in place because neither the NDP nor the IDP had been approved by council. I would submit that to impose an IDP and an NDP, given the history that my client has faced in moving to the new location, that the history that my client has faced and the challenges involved in moving to that new location, that care ought to be granted in determining whether this is a circumstance in which the NDP may be overridden. You've heard from my client repeatedly that every requirement is going to be met in this case. And the CFO that they are planning to expand is going to better and improve their operations. And given that in their former location in Willow Creek, as was noted in cross-examination by Mr. Kennedy, there are no CFO exclusion zones. Given that that is the case, then care ought to be taken in determining whether their participation in the NDP process is a valid ground for determining whether the NDP may be overridden in this scenario. And I would submit that it is, if only given their history and their good faith in coming to the table. Mr. Schneider provided no firsthand accounts that my clients who are directly affected property owners actually had any notice of either the public participation for the NDP, nor did they have any notice that the NDP was coming into place. And when you have a colony of 100 people who are moving across county lines to improve not only your county, but the county that they left behind, I would submit that you ought to go above and beyond to ensure that they are provided with the fair chance to comment on issues and circumstances that are going to directly affect them. As I noted, this is an application that has met and exceeded all other requirements, including setbacks. But I would also say significantly, as I've repeated here a few times already, this is going to make this confined feeding operation better. If your concern is contamination of waterways, then this CFO is for you because it is going to be moving it half a kilometer from Little Bow River. If your concern is environmental stewardship, then this CFO is also for you because of the automated systems that are going to be employed here, the expanded caging that is going to be granted to the hens, both of which are going to mitigate environmental circumstances that are subjecting or that are subject and consequences of the CFO operation. But I would submit that the most compelling reason to grant this approval is because of the consequence of what's going to happen if you do not grant this approval. As I noted, it was clearly not the intent of the MDP to close down existing CFOs. And my clients are subject to the market, just like everyone in our provinces. They're subject to inflationary pressures and rising costs, just like everyone else is. And when those pressures mean that you need to expand your operation in order to pay for changing regulations and a changing regulatory environment, then the consequence of not granting that approval, being that the operation will be terminated, does not accord with either the intent or purpose of AOPA or the MDP and IDP for which this board ought to be granting due consideration. And then in closing, I'll just note that the lack of opposition to the CFO, even from neighbors who would be subject to it, is telling and ought to be granted due consideration by this board as well. And subject to any questions from you, Chair and panel members, those are my submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Vulcan County, Mr. Schneider, closing arguments that you may have?
You're on mute.
Sorry, my apologies. I had the great lead off here, and now I got to start all over again. But that's technology for you, right? So Madam Chair, members of the panel, I thank you for the opportunity to allow us to comment on this application and go through the process here. I don't have a lot to add here. Just a couple final points and thoughts that I will leave. Mr. Harrison referenced once again council at my response when I was asked about council's opinion about granting a waiver. I just would like to once again state that Vulcan County was not approached for a waiver. I cannot speak on behalf of council. I'm representing the council's letter and the discussion that council had in regards to this, but they were not asked for a waiver. I cannot speak on behalf of council. I just would like to make that very clear. I'm not, if that is something that needs to be answered by the panel, that would have to go back to council. That's the way the Municipal Government Act and the municipal governance works. So I would just like to make that point once again, as it was referenced once again by Mr. Harrison, in regards to me not answering on behalf of council if a waiver would be favorable. Also, in the original application, there was an adjacent landowner that did submit comment in that. That was in the first application there. It was from McDougall. I believe as far as this goes, this document has been in place since 2012. Council did their due diligence, and from the public hearing minutes, the public minutes of that meeting, I was shown that the consultation was done. I can't speak to why the applicant did not comment at this time, but we did follow our procedure as set out in the MGA for notification and holding our public hearings. So I do believe that the due diligence was done. This 9 years ago, we were all sitting in different chairs, so I can't speak to, as I can't say that I personally delivered the letter to them, but our policy is to notify all adjacent neighbors, and I have no reason to believe that would not have occurred at the time. I think As far as CFO exclusion zones, as a council, our mandate is to promote safe and viable communities. Water protection is a huge issue, and I believe this council has been very consistent in our decisions to err on the side of caution when anything is around water. These exclusion zones are no different. They have been applied across the entire county consistently, and we have been provided no technical documentation to suggest that this application would be any different than any others. We're looking at it as a precedence. We have never been asked for a waiver or to be agreed to a waiver for any NRCB hearing. We simply answer the questions that were asked of us by the NRCB in the April 8th letter that Vulcan County submitted. Those are the answers. And at the time, the question was, does it fall within a CFO exclusion zone? And our answer was, yes, it does. So I really don't have anything to add beyond that point. We've answered the questions. I believe we've justified why we have these under the AOPA regulations. It states that counties are able to establish these zones. The MGA also establishes our authority to establish these zones. That is what the Council of 2012 did, and I will argue that it was done consistently across the entire county. So I really don't have anything else to add to that. I just once again thank everyone for their time, and yeah, I guess if there was anything further, we're happy to answer any further questions. But thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. Mr. Harrison, does Little Bow Colony have a reply argument?
I do not, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll move into my closing remarks.
Madam Chair, this is Fiona Vance with NRCB Field Services. I obviously do not have a final argument to make as we did not participate in the evidence portion. I suppose I just had a comment on scope, and it addresses Mr. Harrison's first closing argument, which related to IDPs and MDPs. And I suppose that if the board were to contemplate making a finding in the context of this decision in relation to how Section 20 of AOPA and Section 638 sub 3 of the MGA interact as a matter of interpretation of Section 20 of AOPA, I suppose my comment is that if the board is contemplating making such an interpretation, I think Field Services would be grateful for an opportunity to participate in submissions on a purely interpretation point.
Thank you, Ms. Vance.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't mean to jump in and complicate things, but and I have no idea where the panel might go on this issue. But just to be clear, Ms. Vance, would you expect that to be done with written submissions if the panel were to call on them?
Yes, I think from the perspective of Field Services, I would have to seek some instructions from my client before I were to make submissions, and of course we would be happy to do them in whatever fashion that would assist the panel.
Good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. With that, I will move into my closing remarks. The panel would like to thank everyone for their participation in this review process. No doubt the proceedings can be a little intimidating, particularly now that we're in the Zoom world. To both Vulcan County and Little Bow Colony, I'd like to thank both of you for a job well done. Thank you as well to Field Services for your attendance. Thanks to Ms. Kaminsky and Ms. Taylor, our on-screen document administrators who seem to have things there even before we asked for them. Mr. Weeb, our Zoom host, thank you. Ms. Gerbrand, our court reporter, Ms. Friend, our manager of board reviews, and Mr. Kennedy, the board's general counsel. To all of you, your assistance has been essential to the board for this virtual hearing. We've received a lot of helpful information. The panel will consider this information in reaching our decision, and we will provide our decision to all parties in the form of a written decision report. The board's long-standing performance target for issuing its decision within 30 working days or 6 weeks of the closing of the hearing. And I would expect that our decision will be completed within that time frame. Thank you very much, everyone. The hearing is now closed.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.